Well, greetings to everybody. My second guest in this little series that I'm doing is with my old chum and fellow Mises Institute member and fellow Austrian school economist, Pat Barron, who's one of the leading Austrian school commentators, if you will, on the Eastern Seaboard, and we've shared a platform before at the European Union Parliamentary Monetary and Affairs Committee. So we've worked together, and of course I've been over there to see Pat, and he's been over here to see me. Pat's, I think, wouldn't mind me suggesting he's an Anglophile. He was here in the 50s when he was with the United States Air Force in the 1950s in Britain. In times, I would argue too, as a baby boomer, times were rather better. Life was rather more pleasant in the 1950s. We didn't have as much money, and we didn't have perhaps some of the advances in medical science. But generally speaking, it was a merry England, I would suggest, in the 1950s, rather more merry than it is now. Now, we've just had the midterm elections. Which is, some of it has come as a little bit of a surprise to us this side of the pond who take an interest in American politics. I've visited over the years 35 United States. I've visited 35, and so I've got friends all over the place, and I've always enjoyed my visits there. And I am an Atlanticist, which means I'm very pro-America, and I have been in the past. I am not pro-neocon Washington. They're two different things. I am no longer pro-NATO, and I'm going to ask Pat, who was obviously a staunch member of NATO, where he thinks things there are going wrong and what the American people's take on it. We thought, Patrick, that in the midterms, they would sweep the blue states aside, the blue candidates aside, because Biden is making such an appalling hash of the job. It's all right. The Republicans did all right, but we thought they'd probably do rather much better than that, given just how appalling the administration is at the moment. We're also, I'd like you to just talk a little bit, Patrick, about, we're fairly horrified about what seems to be a certain amount of chicanery in the voting systems at the moment in America. We've experienced this over here in places like Bradford and Tower Hamlets, where postal voting has been largely cheated. Which has put candidates who really weren't winning in place. So we know a little bit about this, the postal voting scam. But perhaps you'd like to pick up on what you think, where you think it's going, and how you see the future developing politically, certainly in the near term, and what might happen when the elections come, the big elections come, the main elections, presidentials come in 2 years' time. So whatever you think, Patrick.
Got it. Well, it's good to see you. I was in England in the early 70s, not quite the 50s, which is a long time ago. But enjoyed probably the highlight of my wife and my life. I was living there for 4 years and becoming real Anglophiles, and as if I weren't before that. But you bring up a great point about the surprise of the midterms. All the polls were pointing to I forget what they called it, a red tsunami or something, because over here they call the Republicans fly the red banner and the Democrats blue. I don't know. So there are blue states and red states, but it didn't happen. Now it looks like the Republicans are going to have a very slim majority in the House of Representatives, but they are not going to take the Senate, which the polls were saying they were going to do, and that it was going to be a Republican Congress against Joe Biden's administration, and that would be a check on a lot of the things he wants to do, he's trying to do. But now it looks like at least the Republicans will get the House. The big question here, and a lot of us are very concerned about this, is the sanctity, the reliability. Was it a true vote? And it's during the quote pandemic, which I personally think was kind of a whole overblown affair. they quickly instituted what they call mail-in voting, mail-in ballots. And there's no control over these things. They are they are taken in and processed by the tens of thousands with nobody checking whether these people actually exist, how many people are voting how many times. Um, and many of us think that the mail-in ballot has just got to go. Now, that's my personal opinion, but also the opinion of a lot of people. We did not have a mail-in ballot until 2020. And gee, wasn't that a fortuitous? Joe Biden hardly campaigned. He hung out in his basement. He actually did hang out in his basement because he was afraid of the virus and hardly campaigned, and yet supposedly won a sweeping election against a man who, frankly, was a very popular president over here. A lot of people don't like him, but he's a very popular president, Donald Trump. And so we think, the Republicans think that this has got to be fixed. Now, in America, the voting, the states control voting. And it's a difficult process. They're not all the same. A lot of these allegations are not being fully investigated because state governments are run by Democrats and they say, oh, there's nothing there, we're not going to investigate. Well, so we're not getting a full answer to all this. So that's sort of number one. Everyone here, at least in the Republican side, are very, very concerned about, do our elections actually mean anything if tens of thousands of votes are stuffed in the ballot box before the thing even begins. Whereas in the past, there was voting day. You went to the poll and you voted. And if you could not get to the poll for a lot of very good reasons, you were ill, you were out of town, whatever, you would apply for an absentee ballot, and they were almost always granted. But then the absentee ballots would go back to the precinct and it'd be just as if you were there as a voting in person at the end of the day. And I've been involved in this locally. At the end of the day, after everyone who are going to vote in person have come in, the polls are closed, there is a stack of absentee ballots that would be opened up, and poll watchers from each party would watch the process. They would compare that ballot to their voter registration, and they would say, yes, John Smith has not voted. Yes, that is John Smith's signature. It certainly looks like it. Count that ballot. And they would go down, and that's how the absentee ballots were counted. There were no other ballots. That was it. Everything wound up at the polling place. Now, this is in Pennsylvania. It may have been different in other states, but essentially, this is the way it was. Then we got the mail-in ballots, and we're just flooded with mail-in ballots. Pennsylvania, apparently, more people voted than there are voters on the registration list. I mean, this is crazy, and yet that's not sufficient reason for the state government, which is controlled by the Democrats, to investigate. This is serious allegation, very serious thing. And finally, it looks like the courts that are honest are going to start investigating this. Now, the other thing that happened with right before the election that I think hurt the Republicans was that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now, Roe v. Wade had been in place for a long time, and what Roe v. Wade did, it set national rules for abortion, a real hot, I guess you say, emotional topic over here, and I suppose in other countries. It's a very emotional topic with the pro-abortionists and against the pro-lifers, or they call it the choice people against the pro-life. That had kind of been settled by Roe v. Wade, and it was nationalized. There was a kind of a set of rules that applied to the entire country it set what the abortion rules were. That was overturned by Supreme Court just before the election. and it kicked those authorities for having abortion rules, if there were any, back to the states where they had been before Roe v. Wade. Well, this became hard for the Republicans because, frankly, the Republicans are not all of one voice in opposing abortion. And the nation, frankly, does not want to have abortion just completely abolished and sent to the back, sent to the back alley, so to speak. Although before Roe v. Wade, there were some states that made abortion very difficult to get, and other states that made abortion very easy to get, which kind of made a lot of sense. If you didn't like where you lived, you could go to another state. If you didn't like the rules where you lived, you could go to another state. So that hurt the Republicans. In fact, this is kind of a problem that I see America has, and I follow British politics, and I think you're pretty much the same way we are, that some of the really great issues of the day, issues of war and peace, issues of the maintaining the purchasing power of our money supply, are we going to have hyperinflation? Are we getting into hyperinflation? Can we solve all this? These things are hardly discussed. They're hardly discussed. We get into there's just a whole cultural issue. They talk about abortion, or it's all about, there's an acronym LGBTQ plus all this lesbian and gay rights. This is called gay rights, which has been is on television all the time. It's in the papers all the time. And I don't know where this is all coming from because, frankly, it's a very small minority of people, and it was not an issue. Americans pretty much are a live and let live. Nobody really cares what goes on in the bedroom. And but the gay LGBTQ thing has become where they're dominant in the Democratic Party. And they're pushing a lot of policies in the Democratic Party that are really anathema to the American public. And I think this is a big problem for the Democrats because they don't seem to be able to shake themselves away from this. Some of these things that they're pushing are just abhorrent. They want to secretly indoctrinate your 5- and 6-year-old child on whether they should have a sex operation or not. I mean, what is going on here? This is crazy stuff. And there are some people who are put in charge of very important bureaus in the federal government who are part of this group. And they're frankly very proud of being part of this group. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with their job, but you have to start wondering about their character, So this has become a big problem. But so we sort of get hung up on all these personal, they're frankly all sort of sexual things. It's incredible.
We don't, it seems exactly the same here. The people who've got the levers of power, who control TV or TV presenters, and people who seem to control the dialogue and the conversation, are just like it is over there. They're talking about all these things. But our man on the Clapham omnibus, I think you would call him Joe Sixpack, is simply not interested. If you go, and I know you're a great pub goer when you come over to this side of the pond, nobody cares about this in the pub. The ordinary voters don't care about this over here either. They're not interested. What they're interested in is inflation, because inflation's hurting them. They're badly hurt by spiraling energy costs, which we brought on ourselves by ludicrous green policies, wind turbines which don't work. We've got now increasing numbers of solar panels in Yorkshire, Patrick, which you've got to laugh. I mean, you know Yorkshire well enough. We don't get a lot of sunshine. It's a great place to live, but California, it is not when it comes to sunshine. So the whole thing is ludicrous. And of course, and so what they're doing over here now, because people can't afford their energy bills because of the government's green policies, the government is giving everybody £60 a month of money to help them with their energy bills, which are people's own money anyway, which is actually printed money, which means it's inflationary again because they printed it. So we have here the politics of the madhouse. We don't have an alternative here. We've got a crazy party in power at the moment, the so-called Conservative government, which they're not. Just let me get rid of that. It's really annoying. Sorry about that. So we got all these same problems. We have these problems as well. We never discuss the national debt, which is growing, galloping ahead, just like yours. And at no time do we have an election, do any politicians talk about the national debt, which is completely, like it is in America, completely out of control. And this is another major problem. And of course, the other elephant in the room, which nobody's talking about because nobody really understands it, but my country seems to be going along with it, is this war in the Ukraine with Russia, which is extremely dangerous. It's escalating all the time, very, very worrying. And in my country, in Britain, you'll find people are waving or putting up little blue and yellow flags outside their houses. These people couldn't point to the Ukraine on the map. They don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about it, but there has been relentless propaganda in all the press that Putin is a bad man, the Russians are bad, and all the Ukrainians are saints. And they've been running with this. And people who were masked up in the COVID pandemic and all this kind of masked and jabbed and seemed to throw risk analysis out of the window in their terror of this bug, which killed almost nobody over here, unless they were over 80, incidentally. They were all worried about that. They seem to think they're not worried about World War III or a nuclear war. It's quite an extraordinary phenomenon. And I'm pretty sure it's the same over where you are, but I've got a feeling that you're in America, they seem to take that, they seem to have put up with this NATO expansionism, this $1 trillion military budget every year. When I've been over, I was in Arizona, just last year and the year before. I would argue, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, there's a sort of almost late 1890s Prussian militarism about America at the moment. They seem to be a favored genre. Military, oh, you're ex-military, you're a hero, and all this kind of thing. And we're both ex-military ourselves. No, it isn't like that at all. It's a job. You do it. You're an airman or a soldier or something like that. When are the American public going to actually say, why have we got 800 overseas bases? Why have we got 200,000 overseas personnel? Why have we got $1 trillion budget? And why do we go from one war to the next? Syria, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, Libya, Iraq. When is this going to end? When are the American public going to say, just a minute, we really can't afford this?
Well, Godfrey, I think it is bubbling under the surface because of all the incessant propaganda from the administration and all the mainstream media. People in public life, if any, oh, well, we're all with Ukraine, oh, those terrible Russians. But in private conversation, people are very concerned about what the heck are we doing over there? Do we really know what's going on? And there's more people starting to be worried about this, and that this could be nuclear war. And my concern is, I'm not an expert on World War I as you are, but I've read quite a bit about it, and how the great powers of Europe sort of sleepwalked into an absolute disaster. Especially Britain. There was no reason for Britain itself to get involved in World War I. And the same is true of America right now with Ukraine. This, if any, I mean, one of the ways to look at this is still part of the breakup of the Soviet Union. They're still sorting that out over there. There was no reason for NATO to expand 1 inch beyond where it was when the Berlin Wall fell. That was it. That should have been the end of NATO. There was no need for NATO anymore. And for a long time in this country, in the 1990s especially, even though it was a Democratic administration, Bill Clinton's administration for much of that, the Russians were talking that we have a partnership with Russia, and Russia is going to be brought back into into the world economy. And at one time, Russia even said, well, maybe we'll join NATO. Now, there was no reason for anybody to be in NATO. NATO was formed to be a bulwark against the Soviet Union. And I have always claimed that Russia and the Soviet Union are not the same country. They are not the same thing. There is, frankly, what is called Mother Russia, which is a great country with great people, a very moral fabric, uh, going back to uh, the very beginning of Christianity. And there is no reason in the world that the West should isolate Russia. But we seem to think, I think it comes from what Eisenhower warned us against, the military industrial congressional complex. And his speechwriters talked him into cutting out the word congressional, that they want to, they just have to keep this money flowing to Lockheed and Boeing and all the shipbuilding and the military, and they strut around the world as if they can control the world, and they do not. We go from one military disaster to another. Um, Korea was a draw. Vietnam was a loss. Every place we go, we have had our rear ends handed to us. In Afghanistan, we were lied to right up until the time that the helicopters were leaving the American embassy. We were lied to that all is well in Afghanistan, right up to the end in America. So there's no, and then the American people just get hoodwinked into, well, we've got to get involved in this thing in Ukraine. And they think the Ukraine war the whole thing began when Russia went across the border. No one wants to look at, well, what led up to that? Not only the months before, but the years before that. And in my opinion, I think I'm pretty much in agreement with you on this, that NATO has no reason for being. Russia should not be demonized. Ukraine has got to come to terms with Russia about, apparently all the eastern provinces are 90% Russian and they want to be part of Russia. I don't know why, if we started having issues with Hawaii or with Alaska or Puerto Rico, that we would stand by and want anyone to come in and side with the Puerto Ricans or the citizens of Alaska or the Hawaiian Islands. It's our issue and we'll take care of it ourselves. Thank you very much. We just have to keep our hands off and not think that somehow Americans are wiser than anybody else. It's probably the opposite. But in America, we have had, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, when we should have just sat back, come back home, become a great commercial nation that we used to be. Instead, we got ourselves all puffed up, and I think your illusion that it's almost a Prussian military thing is very apt, in that we're all puffed up now that we can just go do anything we want in the world. And people are just going to have to answer to us, if there's something going on in Somalia, well, we've got to be involved in it. And we are involved in Somalia, believe it or not. I mean, we're involved in places all over the world that not one person in 1,000 can find on the map. It's just crazy. But yet there's this sort of, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, Patrick, is there as we come up, because I'd just like to talk a little bit about personalities here. We've had the great overreaction to what one might call the scamdemic, the COVID scamdemic. The other major hoax on the planet at the moment is this climate emergency, which is being used as a catalyst to do this, that, and the other. 30 years I've been listening to this. The world's going to boil. And of course, back in the 70s, correctly, in the 70s when you were in England, we were looking forward to the world freezing, if you remember. That we were going to move into a new ice age. And there are thousands of scientists at the moment, expert independent climate scientists, saying we are going into another ice age now. So this science is settled business is complete and total nonsense. And I did hear a bit about Trump actually did allude to the fact that this was a scam and this was a hoax, and if he got re-elected he wouldn't run with it. I would have thought that's for me, looking from this side of the pond, that would be a very major step to have an American president to say this is nonsense and let's draw back. So that's one point. And perhaps I also maybe Trump did hint a little bit at it, that he would get round a table with the Russians pretty quickly and try and calm this thing down, which is what we need: diplomacy, not foghorn diplomacy and military, to see what we can do to rescue this. That would be, for me, I would, from this side of the pond, we would argue that that would be a very popular route to go, for Trump to come back with some pragmatism and some common sense. What's your feeling? And I know you know people who are a little bit on the inside here. How do you feel that would go, given, and one supplementary question, if I may, the man that's impressing us a lot over here is DeSantis in Florida. He's seriously, but because we get everything secondhand over here from American politics anyway, but he seems to have done a marvelous job in Florida. He's talking a lot of very good sense. He's condemning the World Economic Forum. He didn't fall for this pandemic stuff, and he's much younger. What's your take on that? How do you feel that might pan out?
Well, I think that DeSantis is the future. There's no doubt about that. I see DeSantis as similar to the position that Ronald Reagan was in when Gerald Ford was in office. Ronald Reagan challenged Gerald Ford in 1976. Now, at that point, Ford was president, but he hadn't been elected president. In fact, he hadn't even been elected vice president. Gerald Ford had been appointed vice president by Nixon when his first vice president, Spiro Agnew, had some kind of issue. I forget what it was, but so he resigned. Gerald Ford, who had been in Congress for a very long time, wonderful man. I've met him, and he was a wonderful man. So he became the sitting president when Richard Nixon resigned. Well, Ronald Reagan challenged Gerald Ford in 76. He didn't quite make it, and Ford became the standard bearer because he was the sitting president, and he lost to Jimmy Carter. This was pretty shocking to the American people because Jimmy Carter, no one even heard of the guy, but he lost to Jimmy Carter. Now, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is in the same position that Gerald Ford was in, but he does seem to be taking on kind of that he was yesterday's guy, and we're looking for somebody new now. I think he has announced that he's going to run. He might get the nomination. Of course, he's as a former president and there are people who are madly in love with the guy and love him. He might get the nomination, and then he might get beat again, because there are a lot of people he's a very divisive person. I'm really not sure why, frankly, but the Democrats and a lot of the people, even a lot of Republicans, don't like him. But I think the same thing might happen. He might run and he might get the nomination and run and lose, and then DeSantis would become I think the heir apparent. He is a young man. I think he's only 46 years old or something. He says all the right things. He's doing all the right things. He doesn't seem to be divisive like Donald Trump is at all. He seems to be a real man of the people. I really like him. Everybody I talk to in the Republican Party likes him. So I think what I, as a Republican myself, what I hope doesn't happen is that there's some sort of family fight that divides the Republican Party so much that we don't reunite ourselves. Now, I think that DeSantis absolutely is the man of the future, but frankly, in politics, Godfrey, you never know. 4 years, 2 years is a long time. Then from 2024 to 28, that's a long time. A lot of things can happen.
The thing that I find a little bit disappointing sometimes, and it's the same incidentally over here. It's, you know, when you're fighting for the nomination, we don't have quite the same system, but we have recently, you know, with leaders of the Conservative Party, we've had that kind of fight within that family fight, if you, as you rightly put it, family fight. Would it not be more sensible? I know common sense doesn't always come into politics for both Trump and DeSantis and whoever's in the fight, actually just to say, this is what I'm going to do. This is about me. This is what happened if I win the nomination. If I become president, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to talk about Trump if I'm DeSantis, or I'm Trump. I'm not going to talk about DeSantis. I'm going to talk about what I think are the priorities. And we're already getting a little bit of bad mouthing. You know, Trump's already saying, oh, DeSantis is a lightweight and he's a loser, and if it hadn't been, but that isn't going to help anybody at all. I'm very surprised that politics in America has become a little bit more sophisticated than that. Somebody at Trump's side would say, look, don't have a go at DeSantis. You know, that isn't helping you. It's not helping the Republican Party. If you want to be president again, that's fine. Go for it. But talk about what you would do, not badmouth the other guy who might get your job. You know, is that the feeling of the, if you're working hard for the Republican Party across the states in the presidential election, it's the last thing you want to hear, isn't it?
Well, I was shocked when I heard that Donald Trump was criticizing Ron DeSantis. Why? I mean, the guy has done everything you would want him to do. I agree with you. You know, what you should do is just talk about what you are going to do, and have DeSantis say, here's what he's going to do. I don't know, DeSantis, there's a question whether he, you know, whether he's going to enter the race or not. That's a big question. But I agree, you know, they've got to not have this family squabble within the Republican Party that will only lead to disaster. I mean, it only lead to loss. Frankly, what I think I'd like to see happen is I think a winning ticket would be a Trump DeSantis ticket. Trump president, DeSantis vice president. That way it would be very clear. Donald Trump is going to be president for another 4 years, and then Ron DeSantis takes over. This is sort of a Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush thing, in that where Bush was Ronald Reagan's vice president for 8 years, and when Reagan stepped down and Bush was the standard bearer, everyone in America thought that they were getting another 4 years of Ronald Reagan. Didn't turn out to be quite that way, but that was when the country seemed to be going in pretty much the right direction after 8 years of Reagan. And then we get 4 more years of George Bush, who was very close to Reagan. And then frankly, Bill Clinton turned out to be a pretty good president. You know, I mean, the Republicans took over Congress for the first time when Bill Clinton was in office, and that moderated what Bill Clinton wanted to do. And aside from what, you know, Bill Clinton's personal picadillos, he was a more of a small government guy. He was trying to cut back on welfare, for example. And we were not at war. I think we got involved over in the Balkans, but America seems to allows itself to get drug into a lot of things. And if you want to get dragged into something that's a loser, get dragged into a war in the Balkans. You know, that's where, you know, aside from Afghanistan, that's where empires go to die. You know, those people hate each other, and they will always hate each other over there. But I think this is a big issue. Is DeSantis going to run? Is he going to challenge? Is he going to challenge Donald Trump? If he does, I hope it would be on principles, which is pretty much what Ronald Reagan challenged Gerald Ford on in 1976. And Ronald Reagan's principle that he stood on was national defense. The Soviet Union in the 70s was coming on very strong in national defense, sort of the way that the Chinese are today. Everybody's concerned about the Chinese war buildup. I'm not all that concerned about it. I don't think they can project power anywhere. I think they'd have a heck of a hard time even taking Taiwan, but you know, who knows? But what we need in this country is someone who says, yes, we're involved in the world, but we're not going to tell the whole world what to do. And we got a lot of cleaning up to do in this country. Mainly, somebody has got to start talking about just our $1 trillion deficits, and this is going to destroy the dollar. Our good friend Alistair McLeod talks about this all the time. I perfectly agree with him. In fact, I see that what's happening in the United States and in the UK is that we are in this money printing trap that happened in Weimar Republic, Germany, where the government was paying a lot of people for all kinds of things, and they were printing money to do it. That led to higher prices, which led to more people demanding more money from the government. So the government accedes to them, gives them more money, that leads to higher prices, and the spiral goes up and up and up until suddenly, the currency is destroyed. Now, in your country, I just read today that I don't know how many people are going on strike coming up to Christmas. The nurses, the train drivers. I mean, everybody is going on strike over there for higher wages because they're being paid for by the government. And when these things should be part of the private sector, which would take care of itself. But since they're part of the government, everybody says, well, I'll just ask the government to give me higher pay. And of course, the government can just print the money, which they shouldn't be allowed to do anyway. So these are the issues that are really, I think, eating away at the foundation of our civilization, which is fiat money, number one. That's the biggest problem. And then number two is government just taking over things that it has no right to take over. And it's incompetent in doing so, like running healthcare, for example, running Social Security. These things are terrible. And government has got to get out of these, but no one is talking about those. Nobody is talking about those. And then it's going to come as a big shock when, everything seems to go to hell in a handbasket.
Well, I should be looking forward to talking to Alistair McLeod and talking about these things, fiat currencies and so on and so forth, and developing that with him in a couple of weeks' time. And then meeting you in person, of course, in January, and I'm looking forward to that. And we can have a good chin wag. And then we'll have another chat as things develop. And you can give us it straight from the stable cat, as it were. You're over there and you've got your finger on the pulse, and we'll see if we can throw some light on things. But thank you for coming onto the show, and I'm very appreciative. Thank you very much, Pat.
My pleasure, Godfrey, anytime.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.